Okay, call to order.
Okay, I know the first item would be to hold the election for officers, but I'm going to ask that we remove that from our agenda this evening. We are conducting interviews next week for positions for multiple committees, and this committee has an opening, and who knows what happens when we resolve the other committees, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to appoint officers right now. Maybe at the next meeting, we'll have everybody on board and decisions can be made at that time. So if everybody's okay, I would make the motion to approve the agenda, subject to removing the election of officers item at this time.
Support.
I support.
All right. Is that okay, Elizabeth?
Sure, yeah. Do you want to do a vote on that?
We did.
Yeah, do you all
We all agree.
agree? Okay.
Yes, yes.
And it's a motion to approve agenda.
Support.
Yep.
Support.
Support.
All right,
Okay.
sounds good.
That was a consent agenda.
That was the consent
Yes,
agenda motion?
I'll make the
Okay.
motion to approve the consent agenda for the June 15th meeting minutes and the 2022 meeting dates.
Support.
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 Now,
Public comments, just say.
public comments? Okay,
Seeing none, you have to close the floor.
close the forum.
Yep, good.
Carl, could you read the application for request?
Project name, 3669 Plainfield Avenue Northeast, variance request. Applicant, Nyheist Properties Incorporated. Project address, 3669 Plainfield Avenue Northeast. Permanent parcel number, 411032476004. Size of site, 1.15 acres. Zoning of property at time of application, C2 commercial. Current zoning, MXU, mixed use commercial. Action requested of the ZBA. The applicant is requesting a variance from the special conditions required to operate a mini storage, self-storage facility in the existing building at 3669 Plainfield Avenue Northeast. Specifically, the applicant is requesting relief from the required 2-acre minimum lot size and the requirement to install fencing around the exterior of the building.
Elizabeth?
All right, I can start with a brief overview of the situation. So the Plainfield Lumber Building, let's see, has been around since the 1940s. It was constructed and has been in varying degrees of nonconformity ever since. So since the original business occupying the building went out in 2013, the applicant has been using the building as a boat storage operation. And he is now requesting permission to sell the site, market the site as a mini warehousing self-storage facility, which requires the variance from the required site dimensions. So it's a little bit tricky because the application came in before the current zoning became effective. As many of you know, the zoning along the Plainfield corridor changed in December of last year as the result of a multi-year master planning effort known as the Reimagine Plainfield project. So just prior to that zoning becoming effective is when this application came in. So we're honoring that application, which is why it's before you today under the old zoning ordinance, the C2 zoning, which was effective in December of last year. So as a quick reminder, the ZBA does not consider use variances. So what you're considering today is a request to deviate from the required site dimensions that are necessary to operate a mini warehouse facility. So you're not necessarily permitting the use, but you would be either approving or denying a variance from the site dimensions, if that makes sense. So that's kind of an overview of the project. I'm sure the applicant can speak more to that, but from staff's perspective, the variance request before you does not meet the threshold for establishing that practical difficulty necessary to grant a variance. It's our opinion that the request is not really a need, but rather a desired use of the property. So the situation is self-created, and there are many other uses that could occupy this structure. And in addition, a majority of mini warehousing self-storage facilities are located in light industrial areas of the township where they have that space to meet the 2-acre minimum, and they make a little bit more sense there dimensionally and with the sites available. So, however, if you are inclined to grant this request, staff is recommending that you add that condition of approval to address any necessary improvements to the building in terms of facade, parking and landscaping and all that good stuff. So that's all I have for you. I'm happy to answer any questions on procedure or any other questions you might have.
Would you like to present?
Is this where you'd like me tonight? Okay, nice to meet you all.
That's
My-
perfect, but you need to state your name and address for the record, please.
Coming next. My name's Pat Lennon. I'm an attorney with the Honigman Law Firm. We're based in Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, and kind of all over the state. I'm here tonight on behalf of 9 Heist Properties to discuss our application that's before you. We obviously disagree with the staff's assessment of this particular property, and I think it takes almost too narrow of a view of what's going on. The first thing I'd like you all to kind of step back and think about is how we're using the building now. Right now, it's a warehouse. And under the zoning ordinance, it's classified as a warehouse. Now, section 2.24 of your ordinance provides that a building like this can be used for heavy industrial activity, frequent heavy trucking activity, storage of materials for manufacturing production, things like that, big industrial stuff. What we're talking about here is something that's much different than that. We're talking about doing something with this building. Right now, it's kind of been used for boat storage and various things, but it has the right to be used for much more under the ordinance. What we want to do is do something that's scaled down and more personalized for third parties that want to store things inside the facility. So we've been sort of plugged into this category called mini storage, but that's really not what this is. This is, when we think of mini storage and when in the way your ordinance talks about mini storage, it's really talking about a style of building more so than a use. And we all hear the word mini storage and we think of these rows of garages, right? And that's what your ordinance is tailored to address, which is why they have a 2-acre minimum for the lot size, things like that. But what we have here is a warehouse, okay? And what we are envisioning is really a less intense form of warehousing where everything will occur indoors, inside this building. So in our view, it's really individualized warehousing because we don't have outdoor garages running up and down the property. So in our view, the use is going to be much less intense than what a normal mini storage type of use would be. And the way we read the ordinance, frankly, and if I would have been involved a little earlier in the process, I might have had the chance to talk to the planning department about it, but having gotten to know my client more recently and having really studied what he wants to do, I don't know that he needs a variance at all. And you, as the Zoning Board of Appeals, have the authority to interpret the ordinance to decide that this is actually warehousing and not mini storage. And if it's warehousing, he can do that now. And we think that's what it is. And if you were to give us that interpretation, you would also be able to put conditions on it. And some of those conditions might be that we improve landscaping, that we do some things, which he intends to do if he gets his approval today. And we'd even restrict ourselves from semi-trucks and the kinds of things that we could do today if we didn't get these approvals. So, and as you look at the ordinance, I think, the definition of self-storage facility talks about a building or group of buildings. The very ordinance provisions that we're applying today, section 30.29 refers to mini warehouse or self-storage. Not exactly what this is. Again, it says the minimum lot area shall be 2 acres. It must be surrounded by a fence. Well, all those things make a lot of sense if you have rows of buildings and drive lanes and those kinds of things. And those just aren't the case here and don't really make sense when you're looking at this property and what we're hoping to do with it. And notably, it's not just us that looks at it this way. Mr. Nienhuis went to his neighbors around the property. Everyone that he was able to make contact with wrote him a letter to support the project. There was one neighbor, and I think this is actually a great story and really illustrative of what we're trying to explain and express, who apologized. He said, wait a minute, I thought you were doing mini storage. So I was opposing this. Ironically, he misunderstood, the notice of variance, which I don't think was probably incorrectly drafted because it's talking about mini storage. But that's not really what this is in our eyes. This is warehousing because it's all indoors, inside 4 walls. And that neighbor shifted from being opposed to it to being for it. And I think you'll see in all those letters, they all complimented my client on what a good neighbor he's been to all of them. So I guess I'd ask you to look at this in this light and to kind of think about our requests here on 2 levels. The first is interpreting the ordinance to permit us to continue to do this warehousing on a smaller and more personalized scale on an indoor basis, and recognize that it really isn't mini storage in the sense contemplated by section 2.24 or section 30.29 of your ordinance. You have the authority to do this, and we hope you'll consider doing it because it's really the correct fit for this. Because if the answer is no, then the client has 2 options. One is, really 3. One is, okay, I've got a warehouse here. I can do some pretty intense things because warehouses have lots of rights. Or I can try to do some of the things in the mixed use, under the new ordinance, but none of those things really make sense for this building because, as you can see, it would require a complete redevelopment. So the third option is, we can go dark and decline. So that's where he gets left. So at the end of the day, we like the idea of, and we think it's appropriate for the board to determine that this is really warehousing on a smaller scale and to impose some conditions on us so that we can't go beyond, what we intend to do, which is the smaller scale indoor self-storage. So that's our first request. And if you say yes to that, as we hope you do, then there's no need to really consider the second part. But in case you don't, I'll talk about the second part now. So we hope you'll accept our interpretation. But if you don't, then we do need a variance. Because if you're telling us we are mini storage, even though to us that's not what this is or what it will be, even then, this project that we're proposing warrants a variance, a dimensional variance. And and you'll see in the staff report that we need 2 variances. One is from section 30.29A, which is the minimum lot size requirement, and the other is from section 30-29B, which is fencing around the property. So I'll make this easy. With section 30.29B, the fencing, we didn't show fencing here because the storage is inside. The facility itself removes the need for a fence. When we talk to neighbors about the idea of a fence, they're ugly. I mean, a fence around a property just isn't attractive. We're better off with some facade work, with some landscaping, something that looks more attractive than having a fence. Now, that said, if this body says, yeah, we're sorry, it says you have to have a fence, well, then you know what? We're easy. We'll put one up. So we'll agree to that. That's no problem. We think it's probably better for everyone if there isn't a fence, and we don't think one's necessary because everything's contained inside the building. And the ordinance just doesn't consider this type of use in this type of building. So that's why that isn't, I hope not an issue for any of us, because if you want a fence, we'll build it. If you don't, we think it's better this way. We'd rather do facade and landscaping. Moving forward to the minimum lot size of 2 acres. Again, in this particular situation, we think a variance is justified from that. The lot size minimum is, I believe, taking into consideration a typical mini storage campus with multiple buildings and drives. This situation is different. This is a warehouse that's being scaled down and tailored to individual users. It's becoming more personalized. But even if it wasn't, you can see around it, it's boxed in by 4 roads. We couldn't add land if we wanted to comply with that requirement. We shouldn't need it because there's no need for the additional land because, again, everything is contained on the inside. But even if we did, we're physically restricted from doing it. So those are 2 overriding points I'd ask you to keep in mind. But right now, I'd like to walk through the standards that are in your ordinance, and there's 5 of them. The first one's a little bit longer, and I'm sure you're more used to dealing with it than I am, but it talks about practical difficulties and how you determine whether they exist. And we think all 5 of these exist in this case. The first one is whether there are exceptional or extraordinary circumstances or conditions that do not generally apply to other properties. Well, I think we've talked about this. What we have is an unusual use. We have a warehouse that we think, we may not need a variance anyway. I mean, that's our position. Had I been involved when we were first analyzing this, I probably would have said you don't need one because what you're doing is a less intense use than what you're allowed to have today. And in my mind, it's still warehousing. On the other hand, is this mini storage? I would contend that's a style of building, not necessarily a type of use. But if it is, and this all applies, it's certainly out of the ordinary and not generally the type of mini storage you'd ever evaluate, right? Because we're talking about an existing building and renovating the interior. This is not a new development. This is not a new change. You're not going to see a new building go up or a new anything. And the use we're proposing, and this is another thing that makes this different and unique when compared to other properties, the use we're proposing is less intense than the use we're allowed to use it for now. So that combination of existing building, the use being entirely indoors, the use being less intense than what we would otherwise be authorized to do, the fact that we're boxed in and can't expand, all of those factors, I think, make this different from other properties and make it unique. And if you want to look at it on the flip side, think about what most variances are for and why this isn't that way. Well, most variances are for new developments, something ground up, a greenfield that's becoming something. Most of them, variance applications that you see, usually have physical characteristics that are new, that the neighbors have opinions about. This is not new. This has always been here. Most variances bring new activity and new use and more intense use than what's already authorized. This does not. It's different. Most variances that you consider, there's an overriding aesthetics issue where there's going to be something new that's going to affect the perception of the property and the, I guess, the judgment of the community. In this case, it only gets better. We're here to tell you, if we get this approved, we're gonna do some facade, we're gonna do some landscape, we're gonna do some stuff. Tom's here, he can talk about that if he wants to. The only thing that's preventing us from doing all this is the minimum lot size requirement, which we don't think should apply to something like this. The next condition is whether or not this will preserve and protect enjoyment of a substantial property right that others have. Well, yeah, you know, this is, to me, is the epitome of an application that would do, I think, substantial justice, because it enables the owner to use the property for a permitted use that isn't only supported by him, but the neighbors that he's been able to talk to. And what they don't want is something different. And what we're guessing they really don't want are semi-trucks and the kinds of things that he could otherwise use it for. So importantly, if he's granted the variance, it feels like it's something that's a positive for not only the applicant, but also the neighborhood and the township. But if it's denied, it has the possibility of becoming something that nobody likes. So we hope that won't be the case. The next element, the variance will not be detrimental to adjacent property and the character of the surrounding neighborhood. I think I've covered that. You know, I think 6 letters you submitted, I mean, from neighbors. We tried to talk to everybody. So we hope that shows that it's supported. The fourth, the variance will not materially impair the intent and purposes of this ordinance. Well, I think this is exactly what, you know, we're trying to do by giving this board the authority to look at situations like this and say, hey, this doesn't quite fit. You know, we have an applicant who's suggesting a less intense use that's entirely indoors that will result in an improved property that's supported by the neighbors. This is why we have a ZBA, so that this kind of thing can be understood, thought about, drilled down into, and say, yeah, this is good. And when we compare that to the alternative, which is the prospect of more intense warehousing, the prospect of a dark building, one thing that's not going to happen is it's not going to become, you know, a Walgreens. You know, it's just doesn't have that character. And what is also a limiting factor is the cost of taking down a whole building like this and all of the grounds around it. So those limit it in some ways, but the best way to move it forward is to hopefully make it more successful so that it fits in better. And then the last one, that the immediate practical difficulty causing the need for the variance was not created by the applicant. Well, in this case, we can go right back to the boxing in with the roads. I mean, he certainly can't control that. So if it was something else where it wasn't a minimum lot size issue, you know, the self-created nature of the factor would probably be more pertinent. But in this case, where the lot size is constrained by the roads around the lot, that's not something he can do anything about. So that is more of a physical characteristic, which is probably what you're used to considering. And if this was typical mini storage, where what I would contend is mini storage is a style of building, not necessarily a use, then I think the ordinance makes a lot of sense. The criteria that you're supposed to evaluate make sense, they line up. But when you're looking at what I would call an opportunity like this, to take something that could be a very intensely used warehouse, it's very industrial, and scale it back and improve it and improve the aesthetics, you know, that to us is what, you know, we hope you'll see as the best path forward. So I appreciate your consideration of our thoughts. I think there's 2 ways that we can get to a place where we can move forward. The first would be an interpretation of the use as warehouse use, which I think it is. There's nothing in here that says you can't have a warehouse with multiple people coming in and out and using it. Obviously, the one issue left, we trust that you'll agree with us on the fencing issue, that it's not an issue because we'll just put up a fence if that's something that's important to you. But on the minimum lot size, if you aren't comfortable with our interpretation, we hope that under these very unique circumstances, that you would grant a variance from that requirement. And as you consider that, please bear in mind that we would welcome any conditions or ideas that you might have that might come along with an approval. So we hope you'll consider our thoughts and our application favorably. And I don't know if, Tom, you'd like to say, if you maybe just introduce yourself or answer any questions, but this is Tom Nineheis. He's the owner. So.
Hi, yeah, I'm Tom Nineheis, and I own 3669 Plainfield. One thing, now, did you guys get the letters? Because they came in late, and Elizabeth was going to send them over. I did, I spoke with several people, and, the one that was of the biggest impact, I think that Pat was talking about, it was the Fields Fabric next door. And he got the notice in the mail, and he sent right away, fired an email, he had told me. And this morning he called me and he goes, hey, you were in, and you talked to the girls and they got a hold of me. And I was under the impression that they were gonna tear the building down, put a fence around it and put buildings out from there. And he goes, that's not what I want. So he said, I sent another email today. Elizabeth, did you get that? Yeah, and I don't know if they saw it or not, but he
did.
said,
we did.
I want to
We all did.
resend my email and I want to do, he said, I'd like to see you clean up the building, make it look nicer. And that's what everybody said. I mean, Doug, across from Doug Irvin from Brigade and Irwin, and Dean lives behind us. And I think one thing that was interesting in his letter, he said the traffic when Plainfield Lumber was there that he dealt with at both, because he lives directly behind the building, and I can't think of the name of the street that goes behind it. It's Mark and Mayfield, and he lives on that corner. And he said that between the trucks in the road and the cars and people dropping things off, and that's, so everybody was on board with it that I talked to. I didn't have anybody say no. And I want to be a good neighbor. I've been a good neighbor. I want to get out of the storage of the boats and so on. And to correct Elizabeth a little bit, was approached with someone that wanted to purchase it for this. I don't have a buyer for it right now. So this is probably something I'm going to do. I'm either going to do that or we're going to go to the more intense use, because I've had people that want to lease it, and then you're going to have trucks in the road. I mean, under the new zoning, and the neighbors are afraid of the new zoning, I'll be honest with you, because the new zoning, I could put Grand High Reach in there tomorrow, and they could be loading up their Sky Tracks and their beepers would be going off at 6 in the morning or 7 in the morning, backing up trucks, and they could have. I could have Amazon with mini warehouse in there if I wanted to, and the traffic it would create and the input, and they all agreed that you can't hardly get out of Mark and Plainfield, especially between 2 and 6 at night. I mean, try to make a left-hand turn to go towards Myers, and this would be it'd be similar use, similar, low activity, and they seem to be right on with it. So I was pleasantly surprised when I talked to them all. So, but the fact that Jack from Fields Fabric, from the corporate, made a point to reach out to me today to correct himself was a big impact on me, that this is something that would be good for me, good for the neighborhood, and good for the township. So, and they'd have a nicer looking building that would be remodeled. So, which I think nobody's in love with. I'm not in love with the outside of the building, but when I tried marketing it, everybody said, we're going to tear it down, we're going to tear it down. And it doesn't make any sense to put any money into a building that everybody wants to tear down, so, to move forward. So I appreciate it. You have any questions of me, or?
If we do, you can jump
Okay.
back up and
All right.
answer.
Okay, thank you.
Before we start that, Elizabeth, I have questions.
Sure.
Before us, we have an application for a variance for the size and then the fence issue. If I just heard that presentation right, they don't agree with the fact that it's mini storage classified. So we have an application for something that they think doesn't really exist.
Correct. Yeah, Yeah, that's what I heard as well, and I did want to address that a little bit. So, I mean, we've worked with this zoning ordinance a lot, and you've seen applications for mini warehousing many times before. And we have seen applications for mini warehousing in a single building that are characterized by the individual compartments, the individual storage of individual property, rather than the warehousing of larger items, these open air kind of storage facilities. So that's the distinction really between a warehouse and a mini warehouse. And if our code is out of date a little bit in the language, then that's an issue for a text amendment of the zoning ordinance and not a variance. So I did want to kind of make that point of clarification. And this building, as I mentioned earlier, has been varying non-conforming uses over the years. When it was first constructed as a hardware store, that's a retail operation that was conforming at some point. The history on it is, it was non-conforming when it became this lumber yard, and after that, it changed to another non-conforming use because the boat storage was never a conforming use under the old code or the new code. Oops. So I guess staff has made the determination that going from warehousing to individual mini warehousing is a change in use, which is why it's before you today. And if they want to come back and ask for that text amendment to permit mini warehousing in the current zoning and to change those standards, that's another application, that's another route that they can go down if they choose that. So, yeah, that's what I got on the distinction between the warehouse and the mini warehouse.
The ordinance doesn't make that distinction. That's a policy determination that's been made by staff. Apparently they've been doing it a while, apparently you've been following it a while. That's not what it says.
It is.
Warehousing, you're looking at storage. I'm talking about the definition of warehousing. And so we would contend that you do have the authority to interpret this proposed use as warehousing. So I guess I would continue by saying that.
Do you mind going to the mic, so it catches you on the recording?
Yeah. So I was pointing out that the definition of warehouse in the ordinance does not drill down into anything doesn't make a distinction between compartmentalizing anything or not. It refers to heavy industrial types of uses. And the second part to that is that regardless of how long it's been a legal non-conforming use, the staff has classified this as a warehouse, which means that whatever rights we have as a warehouse, we continue to have. So I understand their request that maybe there needs to be a text amendment to make this more clear. A text amendment can always make things more clear. But until there is one, this body has the authority to interpret the ordinance and interpret the definition of warehouse as a use to allow our particular use. Now, it doesn't feel like things are trending that way. And if that's not how you want to look at it, we strongly believe that our variance is warranted. This is a large property. It's not like we're talking about something that's not close to 2 acres. It's more than half. That coupled with the fact that all of this use will be inside the building, and all the other comments that Mr. Nienhuis made, we hope that you'll grant the variance. We think, and we can always come back and ask you expressly for an interpretation as well, if that's what we choose to do. Or the township could modify the ordinance if they want to make it more clear. But it doesn't change the definition of warehouse as it reads in the ordinance right now. Thanks.
So I'm back to square one.
Sure. So,
We postpone this because it sounds to me like we have 2 different opinions on what we have or don't have. Or option B is, the application is, I don't know if they want to withdraw the application. I don't understand where we're at right now.
Sure.
Because they're making the point that we don't have this classified correctly, that they think they're a warehouse, and they
Sure.
want to exercise their rights under the warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
Then so be it, this application's mute.
Yeah, so I do think if they're going to ask for a determination on that, that is a separate issue that we'll need to notify again. We'll need to republish. A process will need to be done for that, since this was only notified for the site dimensional variance. And the warehousing use in particular is not what I was describing. I was describing the mini warehousing, which is what we have classified this particular use as because of the individualized nature of it. So if they disagree with staff's interpretation, that is perfectly their right to do. That's why the ZBA partly exists, so you can make those determinations. So if they would like to go that route, they can certainly do that. Or you can consider the variance request for the site dimension today.
It might, I don't know how the board feels, but if they're willing to consider the variance request, we think that's an equally strong argument. We're all here. I think we all understand what we're pursuing. I don't know that we've heard anything that would really cause you to, well, maybe I haven't heard any discussion or questions that lead me to think that there's great concern about granting this variance. If there is, then maybe we are better off stepping back. But the notion of granting the variance with conditions would be something we'd be receptive to if that's what the board is feeling. If, we don't view this as a particularly controversial item, but maybe it is, but if it is, then maybe we do need to press pause and come back with a more complete application and discussion of the issue of warehouse. Because it, in fairness to Elizabeth, I understand her reading of the term mini storage, and I think she understands our reading of the term warehouse. And there's the kind of the third element, which I think was more your question. If we're a warehouse, we can do some very intense things. And one thing I think is clear is we're a warehouse now. And I don't think she disagrees with that, or anyone does. Our proposed use is more of a mini storage kind of a use. That is less clear. But what I think is clear, and if you disagree, let me know, but we are a warehouse. I mean, that's what we were told we are. That's, that's what they told you, right? Because when we said, when he originally approached them about the application, they said, you're a warehouse, and what you want to do is mini storage. Okay, if we're a warehouse, we have obviously broader things that we can do as a warehouse. So I don't know if that helps or confuses things even more, but I'm trying to help.
I don't think that I ever said that you weren't a warehouse. You are a warehouse.
That's what
currently.
I agree. I think we agree that we are a warehouse.
Okay. Is warehouse allowed under C2 commercial?
No,
Is it allowed under mixed-use commercial?
no.
So if this building is a warehouse, it does not meet the code of when it was sent in, and it does not meet the code today.
But we're a legal non-conforming use, so we can continue our use. We're grandfathered, right? I mean, that's the point.
And that, I think, is my point exactly. That use, you're now changing the use, and just because
We're
you can
changing.
do more intense things doesn't mean that you can change it to any use that you want. So based on the change in use, you need this variance.
Well, and when you say change in use, you're referring to a change to mini storage, because that's a change in use under the ordinance based on your interpretation. As a warehouse, the definition there allows us to do more intense things.
But the point is, when you sent this application in, the existing zoning on that property was C2. That does not allow warehousing.
Well, that's what we are now, though. We're a legal non-conforming use as warehousing. We were that then and we're that now.
And,
And we'll be that unless we do this.
and I guess that's what I was gonna say is, I still don't understand whether you want us to move forward with the application that you've put forth or not.
Well,
It doesn't make any sense for us to sit here and debate what you are, what you aren't, all that kind of stuff. Are we
Well-
considering the application for the mini warehouse, self-storage, and the two items that were specifically asked for us to not have or to grant the
that's what's in
variance
front of
for?
us.
That's what's in front of us.
That's
Yeah,
what
and
we're
I
being
think,
asked.
for us to know what we'd like you to do, I just want to be sure everybody understands the questions. And I think we're still sifting through that. What I would contend, and if Elizabeth doesn't agree, I'll ask her to correct me, but is that we're a warehouse now. And as a warehouse, we're a legal non-conforming use. So we can continue to be a warehouse and all the things that warehouses can do. What staff is saying is that we're proposing to change our use from warehouse to mini storage. And what we're, in order to do that, we need a minimum lot size variance, because it was permitted under the last ordinance. And if we make that change, we're willing to say we're mini storage and we're not warehouse anymore, if that makes sense. She's nodding. So, and maybe we do need more time to sort all this out for all of you, or it's too much to handle in one meeting, because it is very complicated. But if your impression is that, what we're focused on is the finish line, not necessarily how we get there. Whether it's through an interpretation or whether we receive a variance, it doesn't matter to us. What we're hoping to become is mini storage as the township sees it. And in order to do that, we would need this dimensional variance. And if that's something that you're receptive to, we can save all of ourselves some time and, consider the variance.
Oh,
If not, then we should probably,
I have some very specific questions about that. By the map that we have in front of us, this one in particular, is the building footprint north to south, are those walls on the property line? Does anybody know the answer to that question? Well, you have High Street on the north and you have Mark Street on the south. By this map here, at least the way I'm reading it, is that the building itself sits on the property line on both streets. Okay?
looks like it does.
So, in part two of we're being asked to is the fence. Well, if it's built on the property line, you can't put a fence up, so you're probably better off that way. My second question
Well,
is,
with respect to that, though, the picture, I don't know if you can pull it back up,
Which one?
just of the building.
Oh, sure.
I mean, I'm looking at it, looks like there's some room there. Maybe that's the overhang. It certainly looks like there's room for a fence if you'd like one.
well,
15 feet on the south side of the building.
you have 15 feet on the south side?
Between because there's,
I don't think the
signs,
drawing's accurate looking
back
at
when
the.
Plainfield lumber was there said parallel parking only, parallel,
Yeah, I know,
I think those
I
are
use it a
parking
lot.
spaces.
Doesn't mean it wasn't.
I bet those are parking spaces. Because they go all the way down.
Well,
I don't think the building's shown, unfortunately.
that's one thing I would like to know is exactly where this building lies within the property, per se, footprint of the property and the right-of-way of the streets. And that simply, for me, gets me to the issue of the fence. I'm probably in agreement that a fence on this property, no matter what decision we make, is not,
It wouldn't fit.
it not only wouldn't fit, it doesn't fit the neighborhood.
Right. And you'd be in the right of way if there was a fence in that.
It wouldn't do that. You're saying that you have warehousing rights as a grandfather clause. Is he correct there, Elizabeth?
That is a legal interpretation.
That's my interpretation as well. So what you're saying is you would have the right to do most any significant warehousing on this property. I don't think that's true. I think legally, the township would have a right to tell you you can't do certain things there. The biggest question that I have, and this may be for Mr. Nineheis, what do you plan on storing in there? Do you have any idea?
Well, if we get the variance, I'm gonna do self-storage, similar to what Kmart, just exactly what Kmart did.
You're gonna build individual slots so you're gonna end up with a mini storage facility.
Self-storage inside the building.
But you're gonna have individual cubes or whatever you wanna call them on the inside that are leased or whatever by a particular person, and you may have 30, 40, 50 of those inside the building. Am I correct? And that's what your assumption is?
In the side door, do your business and drive out the back door.
Yeah, since that's the only two doors in the building, yes. If that is the case, mini storage needs a 2-acre minimum. That's what our ordinance says. And that's what we're being asked.
The Bauma storage is 1.74 acres, which is.
We're not here to consider the Bauma storage, okay?
So there is precedent for smaller, and our density will be way greater inside our building than what people have 3 or 4 acres.
Okay.
We're being asked two things. A size deviation, a size variance from 2 acres to 1.15, whatever it was, and a fence. Number one, to me, it doesn't meet the size, period. No matter what goes in there, self-storage, warehousing, whatever, it doesn't meet that. Second, yes, I could probably get away with not having a fence. But to me, it doesn't meet the 2-acre, and I don't think we should approve. If we're gonna go forward with this, to me, that's a very strict issue, and to me, that's a no. Now, if this board is inclined, and I may be in agreement, to postpone this, to go through this with a little more detail, I'm not opposed to that, but that's my opinion.
Do you have anything, Mike?
Excuse me, I would agree with most of what was just said. I wouldn't think that a fence would be appropriate for the property. Facade improvements would be preferable. But the size of the lot, I do believe, probably requires some more discussion.
I agree. With a fence as well, because the fence, to me, looked at that, would have to be within the right of way. Because there's a 0 lot line for the most part on the north and south, but to fit the minimum requirement of 2 acres, I'm inclined for postponement as well.
Well, I'll make it easy. I would like to make a motion to
Oh,
deny the,
Point of order, we never opened the public hearing for this specific
to have-
agenda item.
say public hearing on the agenda? It does.
And I just want to make sure everybody
Okay.
that wants to
Yep,
speak. can-
so before I make my motion, you want to call for public comment?
Public comment?
Brian Justema, 5952 Elk Cove Drive. Also a member of the Planning Commission, just put that out there so everybody knows. I just look at this and I understand that it was put under or started under the old zoning ordinance. It was a drastic change when Reimagine Plainfield was brought on. But the fact that it doesn't qualify under the old statute or old zoning requirements and definitely does not qualify moving forward. A lot of people put a lot of hard work into Reimagine Plainfield. I think it's a great idea. It's going to take a while to get there, but it's starting off on the wrong foot by doing this is exactly going in the wrong direction of where we want to head. And the fact that it didn't qualify back then and doesn't qualify now, I think should be sort of the underlying reason that it is denied.
I just had a chance to speak with my client. I think we would like to postpone to the next meeting to further discuss our characterization as a warehouse, what that means, what our legal nonconforming use rights might be, and those types of considerations that we've been discussing. We just think everyone should have a clear understanding of that before any final decisions get made. If you're going to consider postponing until next month. Thank you.
I'll close the floor for public comment.
Close the floor for public comment.
I'm going to go back and make my motion to deny the request for variance for the special conditions of the 2-acre lot minimum and site fencing required to operate a mini warehouse slash self-storage facility at 3669 Plainfield Avenue Northeast, based on the following 5 findings of fact. 1, the subject site does not have unique features in its lot dimensions, topography, and features. 2, the conditions of the site and development circumstances are self-created. 3, the dimensional requirements do not unreasonably prevent the property owner from using the property for the permitted purpose and are not unnecessarily burdensome. 4, the variance is not consistent with development in the area and if applied would not be equitable with adjacent property owners. 5, this request is not so common in the township that an ordinance amendment is necessary.
Before I approve this. What you're requesting, Tom, is a denial of this request. Okay. Just as a discussion, you're not in favor of postponement, then that's the way I take your,
If we postpone, the lot size is not going to change, is it?
that's correct. That's what I wanted to hear from. I support.
Mike?
We get to take a vote.
Oh,
Yep. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, same sign. Okay.
So staff comments is next on the agenda item.
Yes.
I only have one thing here. The Township Board and the Planning Commission have both moved their meeting times up to 6 PM rather than the 7 PM start time. I think for consistency's sake, it's worth considering for the ZBA as well. Just wanted to get kind of your preliminary feedback on that.
I'll give my feedback. Every other board has went to 6 PM. I don't know if it's a personal issue for anyone on this board, but this board doesn't linger on and go for a long time. But it would just be nice to have consistency across the township to have everybody going at 6 o'clock if it works.
Just a comment, I'm retired, so 6, 7 o'clock makes no difference to me. Planning Commission, at the last Planning Commission meeting, our chairperson was late. She works till 5 o'clock downtown and has a difficult time getting here. We are considering moving to 6:30. But for the ZBA, I'm in support of, we generally have 1, maybe 2 items for the year.
Yeah.
So having those done at 6 o'clock, I'm in support of that.
For myself, since 131 has been fixed, I can do 6 o'clock. I could not be so confident. prior to
6 is
that.
okay with me.
Okay, thank you. And a heads up, we will have a ZBA application next month as well.
Have one next month?
We will. I know.
In a row.
And we should have a new member.
You should have a new member, and I will not be available that night. So, sorry, my apologies in advance, but
When is it? I didn't,
March 15th.
let you know. That rings a bell for some reason, and I can't think of what it is, but
Okay. We have alternates, so.
If you go earlier, I can help you.
Yep.
Any comments up here?
nope. We're adjourned.
Guess we're done.
Get it?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So you just came tonight to see how mean and gruff and all that we were? Now you know.
Never step into the unknown unprepared.